The last thing I'd like to cover is one of the most common mistakes that we see in territories, and that comes when we're combining multiple territory types. We see this a whole lot, and I want to point it out just to make sure that you don't end up in the same situation. Let's remember back in, I think it was section 6, where we started combining the territory state category with the additional territory countries. So where we had, somebody who may perform work in a few states in the US and then maybe also in Mexico. One of the things that we see pretty commonly is something like this, where somebody has specified a territory country that overlaps and overtakes territory state definitions. This is, I think, the clearest example possible of this mistake. Territory country specified of US means that this location will be returned for any search that lands in the US. So that means 53202, which is a zip code in Milwaukee, 90210, which is Beverly Hills, California, 80205, which is Denver, Colorado, and everywhere in between. I don't care where you search, this is going to be returned. And so that overlaps and nullifies the territory state, because territory country already overlaps Wisconsin. The thing that I tell people to visualize in their mind is as if they were bucket filling the entire United States. That means that you've already filled up the US. You don't need to fill in just the state of Wisconsin, because that's already been provided. So avoid that by looking out. When you specify a territory country, if that overlaps the state territory, that's effectively going to null out the value of that territory state. So there's no need to specify. If somebody services the entire United States, of course they service Wisconsin. We typically see this mistake where this is actually the mistake, meaning where the United States was added incorrectly because people saw the word country, they knew this location was in the US, and they just filled that out. So it's important not to unnecessarily broaden your territories that way. So don't make that mistake, and you will have gotten past the one mistake that a lot of people make. The next thing I want to talk about is international overlap. This doesn't happen too often in the real world, but for global implementations that have a lot of highly specified territories, this can certainly come into play. Zip codes and even state codes in some cases overlap across the world. So WA, for example, in the United States refers to the state of Washington. In Australia, that refers to Western Australia. That's their administrative level 1 2-letter standard code. And so, and then in Italy and the United States share a lot of the same zip codes. Same thing with Germany, they share a lot of zip codes. And if you have locations whose territories are in both of those conflicting countries, you can specify a country value along with the territory that you specify. So I've made a few simple examples here. So 53220, that's a zip code in the United States. 56121, let's assume that's also a zip code in the United States. But this particular location in Austin, Texas, services 53220 in the United States and 56121, which is a zip code in Italy. And so at scale, that can look something like this, where you've got all of your zip codes specified with a country code. There's no harm in doing this. So if you are providing zip codes and you don't know, maybe you will grow internationally and you want to get your data in the most expandable way possible, you can always stick the ISO standard 2-letter country code after the territory specification with a pipe character in the middle, and that's how you can disambiguate any of those cases where you have overlap internationally across countries that happen to share those codes. So it's worth mentioning that works for any territory type. So you can see here in this example, they've got pipe US after the state codes, and they've also got pipe US after the zip codes. So that is the most scalable way to enter territory data if you're growing internationally and you don't ever want those possibly conflicting postal codes to overlap. So the last topic that we'll cover in this territory series is how to troubleshoot territories a little bit. And one of the most important ways that you can learn how to troubleshoot territory searches is to understand how MetaLocator Territory Search and search in general works. So when you come to a typical locator and you type in a term of any kind, let's say it's 802.80020, and I click search. The first thing that happens when I click search is that MetaLocator goes and geocodes that term on the fly. So it goes and tries to return a latitude longitude for that, and it also obtains the FIPS code and the state and the city and the country of this term and saves it in a MetaLocator cache in the back end. That cache is controlled, if we go back here under data geocoder, right here it's called the search cache. So you can wipe that out in the case that you want to kind of reset it. But so you know when a search is performed, that data gets saved along with the user's search term in a cache. The nature of that data, you can see it by looking at the geocoding test tool. So we typed in 802.20 or whatever it was. If we want to see what was actually generated and stored, I can go to the geocoding test tool and I can type that in, 80020, I think it was. So I can see that MetaLocator understands that this is the center of that search. This is the state that it's in. This is the county that it's in. This is the city that it's in, and the country. And we can also pull in neighborhood when that applies. And this is called a point-based search. So geographic terms that are city, zip code, home address, and things like neighborhood, those are called point-based searches. And with point-based searches, we can do things like calculate the distance from point-based searches. So now that we've performed that search, 80020, that data is saved. And now the system will go and, depending on the type of territory, it will try to match the values of the search term to the territory definition of the locations. So in this case, if you search for 80020, it will look for CO in the data. And so if you're ever wondering why does this search not match particular territory, one of the first places you can go is to the geocoding test tool. You type in the exact term that was searched, and you type in the country code in order to disambiguate those global overlaps. Then you can look at the latitude, longitude that was returned. You can look at the state that the system thinks this was in. You can look at the FIPS code that it thinks it was in. And then from there, you can go to your location, and you could say, okay, I was expecting sample location 1 to be returned. Does my state level territory actually contain the value that was returned by the geocoding test tool? And in this case, I can see, of course, it doesn't because it's empty. But then here I could go validate, yes, I should include territory state. And then the other thing that is more commonly used in troubleshooting is trying to identify what FIPS code, for example, is returned for a particular zip code. And then I could go in here and I could enter in the FIPS that we saw in the geocoding test tool. The only other wrinkle in that is the various settings that we covered in sections 4, A, B, C, and D. So understanding how all those settings work is very critical, of course, to understanding why a particular result will or will not be returned. The last thing I'll mention about that, and just kind of reinforce that, when a search is being performed, we geocode it on the fly and we decode all the geographic attributes of that search term. So in the case of a zip code, we figure out what state it's in, the country it's in, the FIPS code that it's in, and we store that. And we store that because geocoding costs money. And if you want to wipe that cache out, for example, like let's say you did not enable the neighborhood geocoding at first and you want to start over there, Under Locations, Geocoder, you can click Clear Search Cache. And the system will give you a little bit of a warning and you go ahead and clear it out. But there's no harm to doing that. And it's one of the first things that our tech team will do if they're attempting to unravel a particular search that may not be behaving the way that our customers expect. Another really important tool when it comes to debugging and understanding how territories work is understanding whether a particular result was returned because of a territory match or whether it happens to be a distance-based match. And one of the things you can do is you can display that in a field. And so one of the things that you can control in the results is under List, you can add a new field or you could edit an existing field. In this case, we're going to go ahead and edit, let's say we'll go ahead and add a field. We'll just add a text field. And within that text field, we're going to customize it. And we're going to include a special tag called ML Territory Match. And I will drop that right in the center. And I will say, okay, if this is a territory match, I'll output the words, this is a territory match. Sometimes we'll hide this in a tooltip, for example, which could be dropped up here. If I want to do this in a production interface, I can hide it in all different kinds of ways, but in this case, I will just output this as a territory match and click Save. Now when I perform a search and a result is returned because it matches a territory, I should see that string that outputs this is a territory match. So you might recall that briefly using the geocoding test tool, we updated the territory of 2301 Taylor Way to include the state of Colorado as one of its territories. So I just performed a search for 98421 and it shows me the distance, it shows me the address, nothing too exciting. Now let's search for 80205, which is a zip code in Denver. Now because that was a territory match, it says right here, this is a territory match. If you're wondering where I got that ML_territory_match field, I got it from the article on field templates in MetaLocator. It's one of the most powerful features of the interface builder, the ability to edit field templates. That's available in accounts that are pro and higher. But now we can see that this result was returned because it was a territory match. Sometimes this is really important for your customers to understand because I just searched for a zip code. Of course, it's an extreme example, but I searched for a zip code in 80205 and this location in Washington is showing up. Why? This type of logic can help customers understand why a particular result is returned. In some customer applications, we have included language like this location services your area, or similar information that helps people understand why a particular result is being returned. And that ML_territory_match field, in addition to that little handlebars template that I showed, is a great way to conditionally display whether or not a result is a territory match or not. And again, sometimes I also hide this in a tooltip so that I can use this in a real production interface without necessarily really throwing it in the customer's face. So if I did something like this and I put it inside the tooltip like that, and let's say this was just some other field. Boop. Let's say this was just some other field like the distance field or something like that. When somebody hovered over this, they could see that in fact a tooltip was displayed. So if I search for 80205, and now if I hover over that word, this is a territory match, I can do that for any other tooltip. That's a great way to hide that for any display. So that concludes the territory troubleshooting. Again, the concepts are understand which results are territory results and which results are distance-based results. That's super helpful, especially when you're exploring these various territory settings that were previously covered. The other really important thing to understand is how that MetaLocator search works. We geocode the term, we understand all of the administrative levels of that term, so we know that 80205 was in a particular FIPS code, it's in a particular state, in a particular country. We take that very data and we compare it to the data that's been provided in the territory settings. And based on that matching, that's when we say that's a territory match, then we're going to return it. And if you want to know what that data looks like, you can go into under Tools and Geocoding Test Tool. You can test a search and you can see exactly what the data is returned by the geocoder. And then the final concept to remember is that when we do that, we save those results because geocoding costs money. And if you need to reset that cache, you can go ahead and clear it. And if you've got those concepts down and you have the ability to understand what results are territory, what results are geographic, you will definitely have success understanding and implementing territories in MetaLocator.